If you said, who's going to be the problem? Who's going to go on too long? Who's going to drink too much? Who's going to say something inappropriate? If anyone will, they will know who that person is. And uh, it typically tends to be the father of the bride or a father or a best man, but that's not always the case. You have stories like the maid of honor who couldn't believe, he got up on stage and couldn't believe that her ugly duckling sister was the one that got married first.
This is episode number 661 with Brian Franklin. We are talking today about wedding speeches. This is a topic I have never covered on the podcast, but as a person who officiated a wedding and struggled with writing a speech, I can understand how difficult it can be to write a speech, whether you're the best man, the best woman, the bridesmaid, whatever you call them, or you're the groom or the bride. How do you write a wedding speech? How do you get that perfect balance of humor and sentimentality? Today, we're going to talk about wedding speech disasters and how to avoid them. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to lasting love, I have written 3 books. The first one is called Becoming a Woman of Value: How to Thrive in Life and Love. I wrote this book to help people have increased core confidence in every aspect of life, because it's such an important part of learning how to thrive, how to show up in life in a much healthier way. The second book I wrote is called Choice Points in Dating. And this book is a guide to every aspect of the dating process, from how to think about dating to how to go on your last first date, every step of the way. And the last book I wrote is true stories of couples who found love later in life. It's called Love at Last. And I love this stories in this book. They are really inspirational. So whether you are dating, whether you're single, or whether you're in a relationship, there is something for everybody. You can find all of them on Amazon for Kindle, paperback, or Audible. Just look up Sandy Weiner on Amazon and you'll find all of my books there. And before I bring my guest on, I want to invite you, if you are not yet a member of my Facebook group, what are you waiting for? If you're a woman over 40 and you want to be in a positive place of support, join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. And now for my guest. Have you ever struggled with writing a wedding speech? Dubbed the Humorist by the New York Times, my guest Brian Franklin is the co-founder of Vows and Speeches. Before 2023, he was the founder and president of an award-winning political consulting firm where he oversaw messaging, communications, including speechwriting and advertising for state and federal campaigns nationwide. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
I was intrigued by this topic as a person who's had to speak at weddings and who used to be totally petrified of public speaking. I think people can relate to this. So let's get right into how you pivoted and ended up in this business of writing wedding speeches.
Well, I was writing speeches in general for politicians and people that were part of public affairs campaigns and that sort of thing. I worked in politics as a political consultant, so we dealt with not just speeches, but all of the communications relative to politicians and how they communicate with voters and various audiences. And so as politics got uglier and uglier, it was clear that even though it was a fine career and we were doing well with it, it was just not something that I wanted to keep doing. And so we started looking at other things to do and tried a couple of different things that really just didn't materialize. And then I wound up thinking about this. I was an officiant in a few weddings. I had friends and family come to me because they wanted help with their speeches and presentations and that sort of thing. And it was something that I looked at. And when you look at the wedding industry, it was surprisingly underserved in this regard.
Politics certainly has gotten uglier and definitely
For
more
sure.
divisive, and it's kind of crazy right now. And so that makes sense, and it's a happier time to to
Absolutely.
be working
I'd
in.
much rather work on love and bringing people together than tearing people apart, which is part and parcel with what you're doing with politics. I think it's intended to divide at some level, but at any rate, a lot of the things that you do as a political consultant, getting large amounts of information and trying to compress it into palatable bites. Sometimes they're 30-second commercials, sometimes they're 3-minute speeches, but getting these big broad concepts is it's kind of similar to the process that we take couples through because summarize the love of your life in 1 to 2 minutes as part of your personalized vows. It's not an easy thing for anyone to do, and even good writers will struggle in those moments. So I think the skill set of being able to treat it both as an audience member from the perspective of an audience member, but also someone that can, synthesize and summarize very well, I think makes it a fun topic to work on for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things for me when I started doing public speaking, when I became a coach, was how to distill ideas into something short and clear and not meandering all over the place because I saw connections in everything. I couldn't tell in the beginning what was to be included and what was to be edited out. And through the years, because I've been doing this for about 18 years now, it's really easy for me to organize a speech, to get a theme going, to really be clear about the theme. But even like when I did my TED Talk, I had no public speaking background whatsoever. And I sort of dove in the deep end and then got hired a speech coach and joined Toastmasters and started practicing like crazy. So for someone like you writing for other people, take us through the process of how that works.
Sure, and go just before I answer that piece of it. I think when you talk about public speaking in general, it's changed a lot. I think people nowadays, especially with phones and not just the influence of social media and this TikTok generation where things happen so quickly, but just the fact that there are always distractions in sitting there in your hand and people's ability to listen to anything has diminished. And so public speaking coaching, I think, and I'm sure you would attest to this, you really have to treat this thing as if people have almost no attention span. You have to continuously come up with ways to bring them back into the fold. And I think when I'm approaching things even as simple as a wedding ceremony or vows, which have a fairly defined structure, it's still something that I think about very much about like how will an audience drift off? What are the at what point in this does it start to get boring? Even a 30 seconds in, will it start to drag? And so those are the things that are in the back of my head when I start this stuff with clients. It starts with an interview. It's usually an hour long. For ceremonies. It could be even longer. And I'm going into every aspect of their relationship, not just how they met, not just what they like about each other, but how they live with each other. What are the things that work easily? What are the things that are often negotiated between the two of them? And what are the funny parts? What are the things that you make fun of? What are the quirky things about their relationship or their way of being? And by the time you get done, you have all of this information, and that's where I think it comes down to having a sense of what's interesting, what's fun, what will make people smile or give them some insight into this relationship that they're there to celebrate. So I think if I get the interview done, the speech writes itself or the vows write themselves very quickly. Al- Almost within minutes, you can have this thing put together if the interview is done well.
Yeah, I feel the same about profiles when I write a person's online dating profile. It's really about the questions that you
Hmm.
ask. And then because people write such boring details about themselves, they don't know what to write, they don't know what to say. And in an online dating profile, it's like I feel just as comfortable in a little black dress as a pair of jeans. I mean, everything is cliche
Hmm.
and it just sounds so generic. And even though they think they're standing out and they're unique, there's nothing unique about liking sushi or going for long walks on the beach. It's what makes you different and what makes this couple unique is such an important thing. So I love that you do a long interview and you really pull out not just the interesting parts, but the quirky parts, because that's what people's attention is going to be focused on.
And often it's not something that they would put as an answer to a questionnaire. I think one of the things about this is that you have to be able to say, "Hey, wait, tell me more about that." Right? Like expand on that piece of it. Give me more. And when you get deeper into these little things, that's where, that's where it becomes special. That's where you break away from the generic. And look, I mean, everybody's been to the same wedding, right? Everybody's seen the same script and heard the same script. And I think a lot of times when we ask friends or family members to be officiants at our weddings, or if we're asked to, you tend to see that people go online and they'll grab the same generic script because they run out of time, or they're just not sure what goes in it, and then they wind up basing everything around something very, very straightforward that isn't new or interesting or colorful at all, and that doesn't reflect the uniqueness of that relationship. So the mission is to make sure that every time we do any kind of writing, that it's representative of who they are and what they are as a couple, and what they want, because a lot of them want something very different than the last one.
Yeah, I would imagine. And, you know, asking the right follow-up questions, having it really be unique to that couple. You're reminding me of funerals because that's another place where people write terrible
Yeah,
speeches.
and we've been asked to do
And
that as well. Yeah.
I'm thinking that you may want to come full circle because I've been to so many funerals that just feel so generic, especially if the rabbi or the priest gets up and didn't really know the person and just says something that is just totally not capturing the person and their uniqueness. And so I had to give an obituary. I was asked to give an obituary at one of my best friend's wedding funerals. Sorry,
Yeah,
wedding funeral. And it was one of the hardest things that I ever had to
I
do
agree.
because I had to capture, right, like her whole life in a short speech. And I did start with humor. I took some specific, unique kinds of quotes and things that she and I shared and that other people knew her for. But this was at the very beginning when I was just beginning to speak on a stage, and it was so
Mhm.
scary. But
Yeah,
I do remember like I wanted it to be something unique. And
I went
so
through the same thing last
did you?
about 2 years ago. Yeah, yeah. One of my best friends passed away, and I wrote and rewrote that eulogy probably 25, 30 times, practiced it innumerous amounts of times to be able to get through it, and do it the way that I wanted to do it. I think these moments, whether they're, and we do, like I said, we've been called on by clients to do to help them with eulogies as well. But whether it's a eulogy or a set of vows, these things are so emotionally potent, and there's so much information, right, about whether how you love someone, or how much you love someone, or your life history with someone that has passed, that people get data paralysis. They don't know what to pick. These moments are so plentiful that putting an order to that, especially when you're emotionally charged, is really, really hard. And so to have somebody that's with you, helping you guide that process so that you can find those right emotional notes and deliver them the way that you hope to deliver them, that's where you get the feedback that will actually help you do it and make it more personal. And I think one of the misconceptions when people first hear about our service is that, oh wait, you're writing our vows for us. I mean, that's weird, right? That seems like you're just going to give me all my vows. It's like, no, no, no. These are yours. They're your stories, your words. We're just helping you put this thing in a nice package.
Yeah, that's a misconception when I write a profile also. It's your words. I'm taking the words that people have answered and putting them together in a way that's going to be compelling. And it's hard for us to do this, but you're not making up this person. You're not creating a different person.
Right.
It's
Right.
so yeah. So it and I'm wondering, we have humor, we have sentimentality. How do you find that balance?
Well, it starts with what they want, of course. There are couples that are irreverent and funny, and everything is a laugh, and they want their wedding to be fun. And so it's never going to be 90% humor and 10% sentimentality. It's always somewhere between, let's say, a 7 and a 3, right? Uh, in terms of its balance. But some people want the 7 and some people want the 3. And so I think it starts with getting a sense of what they're looking for and the tone that they want to strike. There are people that are simply not funny. They're just not, they don't have a sense of comedy, but every relationship does. And every good relationship, I think, has some level of humor with things that make each of them laugh at or with each other. And it's my job to try and find those things and weave them in. But I also think that, and you know this, is that you can't just be serious the whole way through. There has to be some kind of break for people, some emotional break, or else the listener's going to just drift off because it's going to be just in the same way that dynamics from a volume standpoint, you want tone to lift sometimes when you're saying something uplifting and you want or fun or agitated and you want it to drop down when you're saying something sensitive. It's the same thing with sentimentality. That has to ride up and down, or else tonally people will find it monotone. And that's, I think, something I talk to our couples about and our speakers, and how much of one or the other, that's up to them.
Mhm. So do you coach them as well as to how to
Yeah,
deliver? Yeah,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
that's
I'm someone
important.
that stumbles over words. I don't know. I played too much football. I got hit in the head too many times. But but I tend to stammer. I tend to repeat words, and it's just something that I do. And I know that when I'm preparing for any kind of speaking appearance, if I'm speaking extemporaneously like I am now, I'm going to do those things. It's something that just happens. And you can try and edit out the ums and the you knows and that sort of thing. That happens with training and with being conscious of it. But the best thing that you can do for any of this is to practice it and to know what you're going to say word for word so that you get that muscle memory. And it's only after you get some of that muscle memory that you can work on tone and you can work on eye contact and you work on stage presence and where you're going to move and how you're going to move and how you want this to appear. And if you're someone that cries like I do, at pretty much at everything, then repeating it over and over again will take some of the sting of those words out. It won't remove it completely, but it will allow you that capacity to get through it in a way that you might not if you were reading it for the first time and shocking yourself with the sentence, right? So I think from that standpoint, we do a lot of that work. And it was an afterthought when I first started the business. I used to put it in and people would be like, yeah, maybe. And I never really sold it. But as we got deeper and deeper into it, it became clear that the delivery coaching was a big, big part of them getting up on stage and feeling comfortable delivering these words.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. Do some people work with just bullet points and not really have
Generally
notes in
speaking,
front of
my
them?
clients, yeah, I discourage that for a few different reasons. One is when you're talking about something that you know intimately and you know exactly how you're going to order it and what you're going to say and you've done it before, then I think you can go to bullet points because these are packages. Each bullet is a package that you've already delivered enough times that you could do it that way. The problem with these kinds of moments is that these aren't things that people do over and over and over again. These are one-off speeches that you're not going to deliver a second or third time. And hopefully, we don't want people. We're hoping these marriages are are one and done. But these aren't things that people have practiced. These aren't things that people have memorized generally. And people that memorize things, if they haven't done it a lot, they tend to start thinking about, okay, what was that next paragraph? And you'll hear little pauses in their delivery that aren't as natural as if they were to just read something that they've read a number of times and are glancing at it, not really reading it word for word. They're reading sentences or phrases by phrases rather than word by word. And so I think that's one problem. The other problem with that is timing, because these are well scripted timelines where they have 3 to 4 minutes, and it's very hard for people speaking extemporaneously to pay attention to their time. And so unless they've really, really practiced this and they know, again, how long each section is going to take, you'll see them start to ad lib and it goes long. And suddenly you've got a 6 minute speech or a 10 minute speech. And in some cases, disastrously far more. So, so that's where I think it just can go off the rails, and it's much, much better for people to try and do this. And also one more thing with the memorization, memorizing something that you are going to speak in front of, it's going to be very different when you're speaking in front of your friends and family, like 150 people up there the day that you're emotional and excited and perhaps drinking. And that's a very different environment than being able to say the script in your room by yourself and
Yeah.
remember it, right? It's a very different challenge. So people get up there, they freeze, they better be ready to go with something else.
Yeah. So speaking of disasters, just
Yeah.
having these never-ending speeches, one of them where you're rolling your eyes and you're like looking at your watch. What are some other disasters that you have witnessed in the past?
Well, thankfully, I've not witnessed many disasters personally because we work remotely, so we don't actually go to the weddings. But I've seen plenty of speeches at weddings. I think one of the inspirations for this was being at weddings and just seeing people go on and droning and not really nailing the moment. And these are big, big moments, and when they go well, they're the best parts of the wedding. The vows, the speeches are the most emotionally impactful parts of the wedding if they're done properly. If not, they're just tedious and terrible and just awful, and it kills the whole tone. So, uh, but what I've been doing in my travels is I talk to lots of wedding planners and I talk to them about what they've seen, and some of the stories are just heartbreaking. And it starts with this idea that you think that people are going to use good judgment, but they don't always. And I think if you ask the couple who's going to be the problem, they're not thinking of the problem until you ask it, because they're thinking about their wedding in terms of these idealistic, aspirational goals, or this vision. But when you get down to it, if you said, who's going to be the problem? Who's going to go on too long? Who's going to drink too much? Who's going to say something inappropriate, if anyone will? They will know who that person is. And uh, it typically tends to be the father of the bride, or a father or a best man, but it's not always the case. You have stories like the maid of honor who couldn't believe, he got up on stage and couldn't believe that her ugly duckling sister was the one that got married first, right?
Yeah.
yeah, the mother who itemized the cost of every vendor at the wedding
Ooh.
and told people how much she had left in her bank account and how much this whole thing cost. I think more dramatically, you've had people disclose pregnancies that were not talked about, previous marriages that people didn't know about. There was a groomsman who seated the other groomsmen, had him told them to have their keys ready, and then at one point said, "Hey, okay, jingle your keys if you slept with the bride." Right. Um, probably the most horrific story I've heard involves a father of the groom who got up and talked about how at one point in the past he and his son went to a brothel in South America together and uh, and uh, and I guess shared a prostitute. So uh, and that wedding, this was a luxury. These are all like luxury weddings that I've heard this from. And that wedding went off the rails to such, I mean, it just ended the wedding. The bride was
Oh,
crying.
jeez.
Family walked out. I mean, it was a real absolute nightmare. And, but most of the time, the biggest problems that people have involve length. Somebody speaks for 10, 15 minutes, and it's not just boring. It's and it doesn't just kill the mood of the wedding, it endangers the food service. So you have these
Mm.
situations where the food's ready to come out and somebody's supposed to be done, and now the food's sitting there for 5, 10 minutes, and or longer. The longest I've heard of that's verifiable was 50 minutes, 50.
Oh my
There's an
God.
8-way tie for 45.
Jeez.
So yeah, so
I
so
don't,
it, it's crazy. But
yeah.
part of the problem here is that wedding planners and I think particularly the couples aren't communicating with the wedding or reception speakers and saying, look, I'm not just asking you for 3 to 4 minutes. I'm telling you, you have 3 to 4 minutes. We may go to five if I'd like you not to. But after that, we're going to play Oscars music and play you off because we don't want the food to get cold, because we want to preserve time for dancing and we have a hard stop after 4 hours. And without those conversations, you're just hoping that your father-in-law or whoever it is, or your best man, Kyle, or whatever the guy's name, it's going to exhibit good judgment. And that doesn't, and they don't always have good judgment. You just know those people, right? So
All
that's where
right.
you have to say, okay, set some ground rules, put some barriers around this whole thing, give them guidance and give them some help. Put somebody on this. And while I can't hold their hand and make sure they stick to the script, if they've worked on something, they've edited it with us, they've practiced it with us, they're probably going to stick to the script for the most part.
Yeah, those are some crazy stories you got there, Brian.
Oh, they keep going. Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I've been witness to people who can't stop talking. And I also, because I belong to Toastmasters and I've also spoken on the Moth stage, the Moth has a little chime at 5 minutes, and at 6 minutes, it's a double chime. And then if you talk any longer, they're going to take you off the stage.
Yeah.
And they tell you that at the beginning. They also tell you what you can't speak about. There's certain isms that you're not allowed to speak about, racism, sexism. And without those parameters, people will talk about anything. They'll talk forever, some people. And yeah.
Some of
So,
them want to start their comedy career there,
yes,
at
yes.
weddings. They think this is their audition for the Comedy Store or whatever it might be. And they're just not ready for that.
No, and it's not the right venue for that.
Right.
What is a heartwarming story? Because we just talked about the disasters. Can you share, something that really sticks out, a speech that you've written, something that was really wonderful?
Yeah, I think the one that I often quote, and it always illustrates the importance of these interviews, is that we had this we had this couple, and the bride was very talkative and effusive and very, very warm. And supposedly the groom was one of these guys that just doesn't talk to people. Like he's really close-lipped, just seems intimidating and standoffish, and at least at the way that it was described to me up front, perhaps someone that was easily not likable, right? And but then they're getting married, and she saw when she met this person, she saw it as a personal mission to get in and like get in his head and figure out what's going on, behind his eyes, and did and fell in love. But I think a lot of people were perplexed. So upon interviewing her, one of the things that I found, and by the way, I thought the guy was great. When I interviewed him, he was much more open than I thought he would be. But when I talked to her, one of the things I found out is that he loved Disney songs. Right? He loved singing Disney songs around the house. He loved, like dancing with this puppy. They I guess she was a big fan of Ariana Grande, and he bought her floor tickets to the concert, but didn't just do that. He then learned the lyrics to every single Ariana Grande song so that he can sing along with her, right?
Mm.
And suddenly, through these questions, you realize this guy's a sweet, silly, romantic guy behind the scenes, and whatever social awkwardness he might have that makes him, or whatever it is that makes him seem standoffish out there, that there's this whole relationship behind the scenes that is extremely warm and loving and caring and attentive. And so by uncovering all of that, obviously it goes into ceremony, it also goes into the vows at some level, these things. But for the audience, it 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 told you why you were there, right? It gave you information that allowed you to like this guy and like them as a couple and see that thing work together. And I think for me, that's always the goal, is to try and educate the audience as part of this and give them reasons to understand this coupling. But for me, I love that one because it was such a juxtaposition between what people described him as and what he perhaps seemed up at the very beginning of the process, and then what it turned out to be.
No, it's a great story. And it's, I think, a really important reminder to people who are listening, who are single, especially, that it's so easy to judge people at the outset for being one thing. And even today, when I first met you, Brian, I saw the guitars behind you and immediately knew that there's more to you than speech writing, right? There's this whole other world of music and being in a band. And I
Hmm.
barely know anything about you, but I know you're a creative person and I know you love music. And so people can come across as one note, and we can easily judge people so quickly. And getting to know people and seeing what their heart is like and how generous they are in their spirit. And you don't find that out the first minute you meet somebody. And I think
Not
that's an
always, no.
important, yeah. And I personally love the quirks. I love
Yeah,
hearing about the layers, not just, okay, that person's a scientist, but you may think they're straight-laced, but they're also really artistic and really interesting.
yeah, yeah. People, especially when you deal with older couples, as I do often, now life's left a few scars, right? People are a little bit more eccentric as they get older. They've picked their paths, they've gotten into their patterns, perhaps, and all that stuff's fun stuff. I mean, it's not bad. It's just who they are, right? And their habits, their likes and dislikes, all that stuff is fair game as long as it doesn't embarrass. It's not. The goal here is always going to be preserve the sanctity of the wedding and the emotional, and protect the couple as part of what you're doing. But outside of that, that's the color. And
Mhm.
as you said that, I was thinking, when my wife is every bit as funny as I am, if not funnier, but I'm the more talkative of the two. I'm the more, you're going to get more quantity of jokes out of me, but the better joke's going to come out of her. But she will, perhaps by default, because I talk so much and I'm so outgoing, you might not know that about her if you met her right, the first time you meet her or the first few minutes that you meet her. You wouldn't necessarily get that sense. But if you give her that moment, it's going to come out. And a lot of people out there need that time and that moment as setup. And don't always judge the quiet person. They could be the sniper, you know.
The sniper. I was married to a comedian, and I actually wrote comedy for him.
Yeah,
And so I was the quiet
that's
one.
awesome.
And yeah, never saw myself on a stage or, being the one out up front.
Yeah,
But one of the ways, the eulogy that I wrote for this best friend, she and I connected on humor, very similar wry, dark humor. And
yeah,
my ex-husband was much more of a playful kind of physical humor. That was his kind of humor. So we don't really see eye to eye, even in
hmm
our sense of humor. But what drew me to him was the playfulness and the childlike quality that he had that I saw on stage. And so yeah, we don't know people right away. And which brings me to my final question. I know you've done a lot of interviews with people and you've learned a lot of dating advice from people or love advice. So I'd love to hear your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date.
One consistent thing that I've seen in every, what obviously we ask, how did you meet? And I ask about those first dates all the time. And, what were they wearing? If do you remember uh, do you remember how you felt when they walked in or when you walked in? How did you feel when you first saw them? Was this something that kicked off right away or not? And invariably, it seems to me that those first dates, unless there was some distracting thing going on that in the background or something, or if there was some situational issue there, or if there were a lot of people with them, when they finally sit down and talk, almost every one of them reports that they talked for hours, that it just flew by, right? And they vibed. And I think that doesn't always happen, but I think for the most part, right from that first date, you may not be in love, but there's a conversation going on that's flowing and that you're feeding off of each other. And you just kind of, you might need to give it a chance to see if it's someone that you're truly attracted to. But if you don't have that fairly early on, if you don't have that rhythm, then I think that's perhaps a sign that that you should like. What is it that you do like? Because is it purely the looks? I mean, like what's going on? But when two minds are alike enough that they start vibing like that, I think that's the kind of thing that carries you forward. And and then suddenly you look back and years have gone by, and you've had this ongoing conversation that seems like one big conversation. And I think that's the part that one of the things that I learned in this is really pay attention to how each of you are talking to each other and what you're getting out of it.
I love that. It's a unique answer that I haven't heard yet. I think the flow is so important, and I can tell I'm still dating. And I had a
Yeah,
conversation the other day with a guy, and it was so not in flow. It was like I would say something, and he would go, "Mm-hmm,"
yeah.
and then I'd be like, "I'm getting really curious. I'm asking all the questions, and I'm getting nothing." And I try to give people a chance, but if you don't have that, you can't force it.
And also that conversation, that flow that you have is is an entry point for the conversations that really each of you is probably reluctant to have, right? There's certain things that each of you are are they going to like this part of me, or are they going to know, are they going to like this or like that, or are we going to share this or that? The only way to know that stuff is to have those conversations and to talk about it, not just to do it. And I think if you don't have that exchange going on, then you're just kind of prolonging that surprise when, oh wait, I don't like this, or I don't like that, or they don't like this, and so it's a lot of stuff that you could just get out of the way by talking about it.
Yeah, well, it's so important to have those hard conversations, but if you don't feel comfortable, like you said,
Yeah,
then you avoid the hard conversations, which is never a good idea
yeah.
because they don't go away. Shocking.
The other thing I would ask, and I know I'm extending the answer here, but is I would focus on like how do they solve conflict? Did their parents just yell at each other? Because one of the things that I learned is that a lot of these younger people that are, well, we just sit and talk about it. I'm like, well, wait, what? When you're angry at each other, you just sit down and you talk about it? Like, how does that work? Reasonably talk about it? And and I think it's because they're young enough to where their parents probably had therapy. Their
Yeah,
parents went to marriage counseling, or they had personal therapy that made them, that way. And then so that's how they grew up. Yeah, people
yeah,
talked about
it's
stuff. Yeah, it's like
normal.
crazy.
Yeah, I know. What a concept.
Yeah.
Well, conflict, I mean, communication skills are learned and they're sometimes modeled for us, often not. So we're trying to figure it out. And most of
Yeah,
us are
exactly.
not so good at it, which is why I teach it in my coaching practice
Yeah,
because it's so important. This is where most couples fail is when they can't do conflict well. One person
right.
gets shut down, defensive, and it
Yeah.
just gets worse from there. And so,
Someone's
yeah,
used to domineering or just coming over the top on it, and yeah, it could
or
go it
shutting
can go
down.
awry. Yeah, very quickly.
Yep,
And
yep, yep.
that's one of the benefits that both of us, I guess, have in talking to couples and in talking to people that are dating and understanding things, is that uh, you get to look at your own behavior and you go, okay, well, this sounds pretty cool. That's a neat technique. I didn't know you could stop in the middle of an argument and slow dance. That works.
I
And
like that.
oh, it was mind blowing. It works. I
Yeah,
heard that from one of my couples this year, and I was like, the next time I got into an argument I told my wife about it, and then we got into an argument. We started slow dancing, and it worked.
yeah. It's hard to fight when you're slow dancing.
Yeah, especially when you're as bad of a slow dancer as I am.
Right. You're stepping on her toes, and she's like,
You're lucky if you
ouch.
don't injure yourself.
You're
So.
right. Well, on that note, Brian, can you tell our audience how they can find you?
Sure. It's vowsandspeeches.com. That's VOWSANDSPEECHES.com. My email and phone number are up there. Just reach out. I'm happy to help you. It's not just weddings. We do all types of public speaking engagements, from eulogies to sales presentations,
Awesome.
and help you make it a little funnier, a little bit more dynamic.
Great. Well, it's definitely a skill that most people don't have, and you're providing great service.
Thank you so
So
much.
thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you for
This
having
was
me. I appreciate being
it's
here.
a
It's
fun
great.
conversation.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please share it with your friends, give us a high rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.